My name is Missy Anthony, and I'm a member of the Education Committee. And I'm pleased to welcome you to Strategies for Effective Disciplinary Actions. So hopefully that is what you came to hear. If not, you're in the wrong room. Regulatory boards aim to remediate licensees through disciplinary actions, but which strategies are truly effective? This session will explore a Texas initiative involving community service and current HRRI research on the effectiveness and limitations of requiring additional education. The speakers for this session are Liesl Olson, Susan Glover Takahashi, Husky, close enough, sorry, and Elizabeth Wenghofer. Liesl is the vice chair of the Texas State Board of Physical Therapy Examiners, where she also serves as chair of the Investigations Committee. Sue is an adjunct professor in the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Toronto, where she teaches and researches in the areas of curriculum, assessment, and remediation to support professionals' performance and competence. Elizabeth is an academic and researcher specializing in physician performance, medical regulation, and program evaluation. You can find their bios in the event app. They have valuable information to share, so we also encourage your participation. If you wish to ask a question during the Q&A portion, the members of the Education Committee will provide you with a microphone. And at that time, we'll also ask you to please state your name and jurisdiction before you speak. Please abide by the ground rules in the program notebook so we have more attendees who have a chance to ask a question. And at the end of the session, please scan the QR code to complete your evaluation. We really value your feedback. So now I turn the presentation over.
Good morning, all. My name is Suji T, as Missy said, and I'm just going to have a couple of opening remarks. Grateful to be here, and we're going to speak in the order we are sitting, Liesl, then Liz, then myself. There are sheets on your table, and if you can't reach one, maybe wave and Missy will find you a sheet. We're going to return to this later after we do our presentations, and there is a spot on the back if you want to note your questions for the panel. I think that's it. Over to you, Liesl.
Good morning. Can you guys hear me okay? I'm Liesl Olson. I am the vice, like she said, I'm the vice chair of the, well, where's my first slide? Oh, well, it's gone. That's okay. I'm Liesl Olson. I'm the vice chair of the Texas Board, and also serve as the chair of the Investigations Committee for the board. I'm from Texas, so in Texas on Fridays and Saturdays we play football. So I'm from Lubbock, which is the home of Texas Tech, the Texas Tech Red Raiders. So everyone get your guns up. We always say, oh, Karen's giving me the Longhorn sign. I'm going to be nice because I'm up here, but we have a different sign for the Longhorns that I won't do. But anyway, I'm a little bit out of my comfort zone here. How everyone talked about how they got riched this weekend. I think I got riched too, or Karen. I'm not sure which, but I think Rich was looking at different jurisdictions and what they did for different types of disciplinary actions, and he saw in ours that we do some community service. And so then he reached out to Karen, and then Karen reached out to me, and that's why I'm standing here. So y'all give me friendly faces because I am not a public speaker. I even had to write in my notes, my name, I am Liesl Olson, just in case I got up here and forgot that. So also attending this session is Karen Gordon, and I'm sure most of you guys know her, but she is our board coordinator. She's amazing. She served on the board for 12 years. She's a PT, and she's, I don't know how long you've been board coordinator, but 110 years. So she's been involved with a lot of stuff with the FSBPT, and she's so knowledgeable, and we are so thankful to have her on at the Texas board because she keeps us organized and in line, and gives us lots of historical perspective on many, many things. So she is a wealth of knowledge, so if I mess anything up here today, she'll square it up at the end, right, Karen? You'll straighten everybody out. I don't know where my first slide went, but it's gone, but it had a picture of the bluebonnets of Texas. And we don't have them in West Texas, but they're a beautiful flower. They're our state flower, and they grow in Karen's area, kind of down around Austin. All right, so let's move on to the second slide. So in Texas, we're an independent state board. We do have kind of a administrative, we have the Executive Council of Physical Therapy and Occupational Therapy Examiners. And under that, we have the Occupational Therapy Board, and then we have our PT Board. We both operate independently underneath that, but they have some merged under EC, PT, OTE. We have some merged administrative functions with staff and with investigations staff and all of that. Our board is comprised of 9 members. 6 of them are PT, and then we have 3 public members. At our last board meeting, and actually at every board meeting, Karen gives us an update on the number of licensees that we have. And in the state of Texas, we have about 23,500 PTs and 11,800 PTAs. And by my Texas math, that's about 35,000 licensees. So we have quite a lot of licensees in our state. This comes from the investigations staff, and in the last 3 years, we've received and initiated almost 3,600 formal investigations. This is combined for PT and OTs. So for PTs, PTAs, OTs, and OTAs. But our numbers for PT, the investigations committee meets quarterly. And this last quarter, we looked at 201 cases, ranging from all different things, from late renewal, from non-disclosure of criminal history, patient abandonment, all of the different things that we look at. But we looked at 201 cases. We also had 6 informal settlement conferences, which is kind of a time when the licensee can come and plead their case, I guess, to us may be the best way to say it. And from those 201, we had 17 orders that we sent out, and 14 of those were agreed to. And 3 will go through another process because they did not agree to those orders. They'll come back to an informal settlement conference. So kind of our process is, obviously the complaint comes in, it gets assigned to an investigator. We have 4 investigators on the staff. They go through the investigation. They write up the investigation, all of the things that happened, what the complaint was, what the licensee's response was, that kind of thing, and then it goes to the investigation committee. And our committee is made up of 3 of us, 2 are PTs and 1's a public member. And then we meet with the investigation staff and our committee, and we go through all of those cases. Again, we meet quarterly before the board meeting. And then from there, we discuss the cases and we make a recommendation, and then we take that recommendation to the full board at the full board meeting. From that, orders go out, and then they're either agreed to or not agreed to, and then we kind of go from there. So some of the disciplinary actions that we have we actually have a schedule of sanctions, and it's kind of embedded within our rules for different formal board disciplinary actions, all the way from community service plus fines, license suspension plus fines, license revocation or surrender and fines. But all of those, would be recorded, obviously, as an action, as a disciplinary action, and that's on file. The fines may be part administrative, maybe a reinstatement fee. We don't have anything that's just a fine, so there's some form of action plus the fine. When I was visiting with the 2 other presenters here, they did ask me some questions about, do we use education as part of our disciplinary process? And I would say that we really don't. exactly. The only time somebody has to complete some education is maybe if they were audited on their continuing competence units and they were short some units, or some of the units weren't actually approved. They would have to complete those, obviously, to be licensed. They'd have to complete those, and then they would not be able to count them in their current renewal cycle, because that audit comes after they're already renewed. They get it, they're found to be deficient, then they have to complete those hours and then not be able to use them in their next 2-year renewal cycle. But that's really the only situation where we have education, and I wouldn't say it's the penalty, it's just completing their requirements. So when Rich asked about community service, some of the places where we might use that would be something like this: practice for less than 6 days with an expired license, or maybe they, upon audit, they didn't complete all of their continuing education. Maybe a little bit of it was taken incorrectly, but it's still a violation. And as Karen says, a violation is still a violation, and action is still action. So it's reported. Here's a sample case. There was a PT that self-reported practice with an expired license. I just kind of made up these dates, but it happens a lot. The license expired on 5/31/25. They renewed it on 6/4, and when the investigation team did their investigation, they actually practiced 1 day with that expired license, and this person got 30 hours of community service for practicing or having practiced with an expired license. I've just put a definition of what we use for community service, and basically that they have to volunteer their time to a qualified 501c3 organization, nonprofit. There's lots of them out there. And then when they have a specific time period, they have to complete their hours in, and they have to submit it on that organization's letterhead with their dates and hours worked, and then obviously it has to have contact details of the organization representative, and they cannot do one where they just donate their money. They have to do the time. They cannot just donate money. Let's see. And somehow this was my first slide, but here it is. There are the blue bonnets that are in Karen's area. They're so pretty. I'm going to show you at the end what it looks like in West Texas, and you'll much rather go to Karen's area than West Texas, but the people in West Texas are very nice, so you can come have a good time with the people there. And then obviously disciplinary actions are reported, and I've just listed where they're reported to, and somehow magically Karen makes that happen along with technology. But the board newsletter, that goes out to all the licensees in Texas, and it's really funny because when anybody gets the newsletter, either in their email or it used to be hard copy, now I don't think we get one in the mail, but you go right to the back page so you could read and see who got disciplined and what they did, and then you call your board member and ask them what they did, and you say, I can't talk about that, but let's see. I think another thing that we talked about with the other presenters is, do these things prevent people from committing another violation, making another mistake, doing those kinds of things? And I guess we don't really have any effective way that we look at that in Texas other than they don't come back to see us again. If they come back to see us and we know they've had a previous violation and previous disciplinary action, then we know. But if we never hear from them again, we assume that what we did worked, but I don't know that we really know that for a fact. So this is a picture. Okay, so everybody do your guns up, because this is our stadium called the Jones. And we always say suns up, guns up, but this is actually a haboob. So I don't know, I think Arizona might have haboobs, but, or do you have them? Yeah. It is the weirdest dust storm you've ever seen. It just comes up out of nowhere, and this is one coming over the top of the stadium. Your visibility can be 0, and it'll cover everything in and just total dust. And if it rains, then you get like a mud rain. And, but anyway, that's just a picture of the haboob coming up over the stadium. So that's why, if you want to come to West Texas, you can see that, or you can go see the Bluebonnets with Karen. So with that, I'll bring up Liz.
Thanks very much. I'm Liz Wanghofer. I'm from Sudbury, Ontario. I work for Laurentian University, and I'd just like to start by acknowledging the Robinson-Huron Treaty of 1850 and to recognize that Laurentian University and my home are on the traditional territories of the Atikomiksing, Anishinaabe, and the Menapate First Nation. As you heard, my area of research is around medical regulation. And I've been working in regulation for quite some time. I started when I was 8 in 1996 and have stayed in that area ever since. But I could probably sum up my career, and I work directly with regulators, by saying collect good data and evaluate your programs. So that's what I'm going to be focusing on today, and as it can help you really have good information from which your boards can make solid decisions. So I would suggest that you as regulators need to be asking yourself some tough questions. You need to be asking yourself, do our programs work? Are we helping to improve practice? Are we protecting the public? And part of that is to ask yourself, so if our programs and our policies are working, what would that look like? What would be those performance indicators? What would be the markers by which we could evaluate the answers to these questions? And I'll go a step further by saying that evaluation is actually a matter of accountability. So accountability is at the core of regulation, and particularly self-regulation, and not meeting that actually invites someone else to come in and do that job for you. Many of you are part of the profession, so as such you are regulators, but you're not separate from the profession. And we demand that professionals practice by evidence-informed and evidence-based means, and so regulators should also hold themselves up to that standard by using evidence-informed mechanisms and really trying to forward the science of regulation. And really, evaluation is part of accountability to both the profession and to the public. To the public, by evaluating your programs, you're saying, hey, we care enough to see that the things that we're doing are actually protecting you and your family, are actually providing a situation where you have the best care possible. And to the profession, it really says, we have professionals here that we have a health workforce crisis, they're burnt out. So are the things that we're asking them to do really of value, or are we really just asking them to jump through a bunch of hoops? So I think that it behooves us to say that, yes, what we're doing is beneficial to you and to your clients and patients. The value of evaluation and data for regulators, really, it provides you with that fact base or that information basis from which to make good decisions. You have boards that change, the membership changes, their experience changes, so really to have more than anecdote upon which to base decisions. You've got more hawkish and more dovish individuals. You want to be able to provide a consistent foundation and really go beyond, this is the way we've always done things. It also provides you a firm rationale and evidence for legal challenge. You can then, when you are challenged in a legal situation, you can say, these are the reasons why we do these types of activities, these are the reasons why we have this type of action within our board. I'd also challenge you to think about practice as the ultimate outcome of education. So you watch the profession from licensure to retirement, you're seeing all the problems that they have, you're seeing the challenges that they have, and by being able to say these are areas in which we see consistent issues, That information can be then fed back into educational curriculum, can help evolve the education for your practitioners, and really help to prepare the new learners for those same challenges that you're seeing in practice over time. And over time is a key piece in that this isn't a once and done kind of thing. We know that practice evolves, science evolves, the way practitioners do things evolves, public expectations evolve. So it's really important to be able to collect this information and to look at it on an ongoing basis. And really good data is at the crux of right touch regulation and understanding risk, which again is really important. And as I've heard over the last few days, that's exactly what your legislatures want, is to see that you're providing that right level of regulation, and this will help you to be able to do so. So I'm going to provide you an example of a study that I had the privilege of completing with my lovely colleagues at the Federation of State Medical Boards, and this was just published recently in Academic Medicine. And we focused in on something that I think I've heard over the last few days is a really key indicator of successful regulation, and that is on recidivism. Oops, wrong way. There we go. So for this particular study, first of all, there's different ways of defining recidivism. We took a really straightforward approach in that it was simply a physician who had had more than one disciplinary action. So we didn't look at the type or to say it was the same disciplinary action. It was just after a first board action that they had a second one. So it was really quite simple. And there is previous research on recidivism. And it really, there are certain patterns. We know that it's more likely, at least in medicine, to be male physicians, older physicians, international grads, and those individuals who are not certified. The actual rate of recidivism isn't set. There's several studies that show it to be around 20%, but it does vary. And I will say that the strongest predictor of recidivism is recidivism, in that once you've had that second board action, the probability of a third, fourth, fifth goes up exponentially, and I don't think I need to tell you that those frequent flyers can take up a tremendous amount of time and resources for boards. So really preventing that second disciplinary action becomes really quite critical. So we also wanted to specifically look at the idea, and I'm using CME here because again this was medical, but the idea of continuing education as a regulatory mechanism. So we do know from the literature that individuals who participate in regular, ongoing, continuing education, that there is a relationship with regulatory outcomes and that they seem to have lower levels of discipline and complaints. But we wanted to take a look at whether or not individuals who were prescribed remedial continuing education as part of a board action, if that had any influence or relationship with subsequent discipline. And as it turns out, we weren't able to find anything in the literature, so this was the gap that we were trying to address with this study. So we asked a very simple question. Do disciplined physicians who are required to complete remedial CME have a decreased likelihood of receiving additional discipline? And we did focus in on, as you know, there's different levels of disciplinary actions. There's the less severe, sort of the more administrative stuff. There's the very severe where basically the individuals aren't in practice. And we actually focused in on this group simply because if you've been revoked or suspended or you're no longer in practice, your probability of recidivism is 0. So we didn't include that group for obvious reasons. So just to briefly go over the methods, the data that we used was from the Physician Data Center from the Federation of State Medical Boards, which, like the FSBPT's database, has all the disciplinary action from all the different boards. So it was really great to have a national snapshot. We focused in only on the MD population. We did not include DO physicians. And we had a sample of 4,061 individuals who had a first disciplinary action between the years of 2011 and 2015. We then followed them for 5 years to see whether or not they had any subsequent disciplinary action. We conducted a series of analyses, including bivariate analysis, descriptive analysis, but really focused in on a regression analysis, and I'll get to that in just a moment. So as it turns out, the sample of individuals who had been disciplined were primarily male. Most of them had specialty board certification, about 30% international graduates, and about 54 years of age. And the top reasons for first discipline were quality of care, professionalism, records violations, and prescribing. And then, of course, they could have more than one reason for any one of the disciplinary cases. So just looking at the basic description, about 36% of the disciplined physicians had CME or had continuing education as part of their board order. So it's not insignificant. So in other words, boards are putting quite a bit of faith in continuing education as a potential regulatory mechanism. About 35% of the disciplined physicians went on to have a second disciplinary action. So it's a bit higher than that 20% recidivism rate. But again, we were focusing in on that moderate severe group, so it's not really that unexpected that it was a bit higher. And when we started to look just at the basic bivariate stats, we found that individuals who were recidivists, about 27% of them had continuing education. And those individuals who were not had about 40% of them had continuing education. So you can already start to see the relationship developing here, where you've got, you know, those the more often you have that continuing education, that tends to be associated with a non-recidivism. Oops. Oh no. Well, as it turns out, the best slide, which was about the logistic regression. So I will explain that to you. So we did conduct a logistic regression, and for those of you who, I'm not sure how everyone's stats are, but what that allows us to do is to remove the effects of covariates. So we removed in the model, we included age, gender, certification, international graduate status. We included also the basis or the reason for the discipline. So we were able to focus in on continuing education as an indicator of recidivism by removing the noise of all those other pieces, which are all known to be associated with recidivism. And so what we found was, in the end, that there was a significant relationship or protective effect of continuing education, in that the odds ratio for individuals was 0.6. So in other words, about 40%, a reduced odds of about 40% for those individuals who had continuing education compared to those who have not. So, and really what that's telling us in terms of how do we interpret this now, is that for your boards, you can think of continuing education not as something, an add-on that you simply, we didn't know what else to do, so we set them for a course. But you now have, at least in medicine, we see some evidence to say that, hey, this does have a potential impact. I'm not saying it's causal, but I'm saying that there is a significant association to suggest that there is somewhat of a protective effect or a benefit when you're looking at including continuing education as a board order. And again, I'm certainly not saying that it's appropriate for every single situation, but there is some value to it. And I think that that's an important thing for your boards to know as they move forward. There's obviously some limitations. We only looked at 5 years, maybe 7 would have been better, maybe 10. We have to still play around with those types of things. We don't have any data on context. So in other words, depending on the type of practice structure, the question is, does that make a difference as well? So that's unfortunate we don't have those data. And lastly, we did not differentiate between CME types, which is quite critical. As I'm sure you all know, there are good CME and there's poor CME. So we weren't able to take a look at those types of influences as well. So this sort of brings us back from that example to what you're doing, and that is, where do we go from here? So let's just assume that, you know, you're all in agreement that this is probably a pretty interesting thing to do and that evaluation is great. You're probably asking yourself, well, what data are available? What do we do with it? And we're not experts in this area. I'd suggest in terms of what data are available, you start looking at the data you already have. I think that regulators often underestimate the value of what the data that they're collecting and how it can be used. Now, in terms of what to do with it, and we aren't experts, you all, of course, have very different, and this has been interesting for me, very different structures in terms of how your boards are organized, and very different availability of resources. Some of you may have some resources in-house and others not. So one thing I would encourage you to do is to really think about partnerships. You know, as regulators, you're regulators and that's your job, and then there are people who are evaluators and have data expertise. And by putting those two together, you can actually make sure that anything that is done, or any work that's done, is applied, that it's applicable, that it's tangible, that it's useful, as opposed to academic and, you know, sits on a beautiful shelf with a nice little publication and impact factor, but isn't particularly useful. So partnerships will help you to make sure that that information is something that your boards can use. And the last piece that I just also point out, and knowing that you all go through these sunset reviews, is that this type of work adds transparency and credibility to your work, particularly through partnerships. When you're doing evaluations yourself and suddenly you come out and find that you're doing a wonderful job, has a little bit less clout than if you had a third party do that same evaluation and come to that same conclusion. So, oh, and there's my slide on the regression results. So, there you go. Okay, so my last slide is just, this is my backyard. In beautiful northern Ontario. This has no filters or anything on it. And sunset season starts from April and goes to August, so please come and visit beautiful northern Ontario and enjoy our beautiful outdoor wilderness landscapes. So, and from that, I'll turn it over to Sue.
Thank you. And I'm going to kind of build on Liz's talk. So I'm here talking about a study that we're doing, and I'm not doing it alone. I'm doing it with some other colleagues across the country, and with some support from HRRI. We're doing this work. So education, you know, as an educationist working at the University of Toronto, we set up beautiful programs of education and support. And what we've found at times is we're not making progress. And so this study is really like, what are the limits of education? You know, when you're a physical therapist and you see someone's walk, I'm a retired PT. I'm always trying to figure out right, left, which part. I'm sure I'm not the only one. But you know, when you're an educationist, you want to be solving problems using education. But are there times where we're coloring, we should be inside the circle and not outside the circle? So this study's trying to do that. There's 2 phases to this study, and we've done a comprehensive literature review on what are the barriers to good remediation using education. What are the enablers, and what are those limits? What are those hard stops or do not tries? We looked at, quite a few articles, and we specifically were looking for those green light enablers. And there was lots of people talking about enablers. I guess it's more fun to talk about enablers. Yeah, and we'll talk about barriers, but really we're less interested in talking about limits. And for some, I was going to curse, reason, people don't define their terms in their papers, and it's really problematic for us when we're looking back at what they've done. So we're going to use remediation about when someone's performance doesn't meet the standard, all right? And we've put a structured plan together because we want them to make progress. Enablers are those things that move things along, you know, things that support success. And the sorts of things like they're just common sense, but really we started with a list, and then when we dug in, we found a few more. Engagement, have you ever tried to do PT with someone who didn't really want to be there? How's that working? Not so well. All right, that there's learning needs appropriately identified, that the gap is suitable for the sorts of things that you're trying to do. All right, so lots of things. And that last bullet on the page, that they have support. All right, the most frequent things that showed up are needs appropriately identified. All right, that they have those supports. And good news for us educators, that the education is well designed. It's worth the effort. So barriers, what are those hurdles along the way? All right, barriers don't cause failure in a program, they just make it harder. Harder for the educator, harder for the health professional who's doing the work, for the licensing board, for the whomever. All right, again, sometimes the reverse of the enablers are the barriers, you know, if you're trying to put the list together. All right, funnily enough, all right, resource constraints, like finding people to do the education, finding the money to enable that education to happen. And, you know, in our systems, the licensees have to pay for that education. It's not provided by the board. All right? The type of competence gap sometimes leads to us not being able to find the right match of education, and then the effectiveness of the educational intervention. Limits, limits, limits. So this is really what we're trying to hone in on, not only here, but in the next part of the study. What are the things that are so negatively impact the feasibility or progress that, you know, things fall off the rail? Won't surprise you that accurate baseline assessment and diagnosis is important. And it's not clear to me the extent to which licensing boards are or should be having a baseline understanding of what is really going on. Because it's really a binary, yes, no, there was a problem, but then how are we gonna match the solutions? You know, increasingly in Canada, that matching of solutions is, you know, being considered. It goes to the worldwide movement towards right touch regulation. And if those are new words to you, write them down and Google them. The Brits have led the way. The Australians have also done great work. Their material is public, and it's very helpful. All right. So the number one limit in the literature is the type of competence gap. All right. And the effectiveness of the educational intervention. There's lots of other things on the list. And these are the things that we are in our next stage of our research going to go and ask the world experts in remediation, help us understand this limit. Because I know that both the licensees who are learners and the boards who are doing this work are, you know, kind of looking in a bunch and providing education. And we want to help them through this research make sure that there is a more focused approach to that. So next, and thank you. Next, we're going to move to semi-structured interviews. We'll summarize for publications, and then, really help board authorities reimagine their approach of not whatever education in the right context for the right problems along the way. I just want to put this here. You want to take a picture of a couple of articles that can help you along the way. This would be helpful for you to consider. I also think anyone who sends me an email, I will answer it. I was taken aghast with the representative from Wyoming who is his own staff and answers his email. That was like totally impressive to me. Before, I think we're going to turn it over to whatever questions we have. With Liesel's help, we put together a couple of cases. It's going to be homework given the time frame as opposed to talk about it now. But one of the things I think in us all being rich, I love that as a verb, is that we have to understand not only what's going on in our boundaries, that fun thing that they made a green sheet about who's the bounding states and jurisdictions, because, Ontario has lots of neighbors. We need to look both to our neighbors and to our federations and outside. I think the legislators were really clear about their expectations around data. And so I think Liz has given you quite a good path around that. And I had never heard about community service. I'm going to take that home, absolutely. There's a list of strategies you need to think about which ones are within your current jurisdictional authorities. Because you can't be coloring outside the lines of your jurisdictional authorities. But maybe sometimes when you rewrite them, you need to think about, do we need more or different strategies? Or have we just not used them? So I'm going to sit down, and we have time for a couple of questions. And I would also get in trouble if I didn't show you this QR code she's approaching on my left, so that you can provide evaluation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan, Liz, and Michelle. Really important work, and we know that it's really critical that we move our boards from their developmental stages through remediation, hopefully to prevention, ultimately. So I'm curious, who are the experts in remediation that you're going to look to interview? Oh, I have to name my jurisdiction. Nancy Kirsch, New Jersey. Hi, Susan.
Thank you. I should have publicly said that one of the best pieces of evidence I've seen is your new Healthy PT work. So what we did is through an organization through Coalition for Physician Enhancement, we did a presentation last year. We have crowdsourced through LinkedIn. So we're going to be looking to speak to attorneys, senior officials who have large discipline panels. We're going to talk to forensic psychiatrists and forensic psychologists. Again, we want to make sure that, so we have been crowdsourcing names, and we will be doing, we received ethics through the University of Toronto about 6 weeks ago, and so we're moving forward. We have an approved approach. I don't think we're going to need too many interviews before we get saturation, but we also want to make sure we have international distribution. And so we have a list of names. We'll start with 10. We'll add 10 more if we don't reach saturation and keep going.
I'm Kathy Arney from North Carolina, and for about 9 years I was on the investigative committee of the North Carolina PT Board. And I will say it was really more in my last year or two that we had the most sticky recidivism issues. And I don't know what that's all about. And I will have to admit, we're not collecting the kinds of data that we could to answer the question about what we're doing. But I will just, first of all, thank you for your presentation. I'm so glad you're doing this work because I think I struggled to find the right, what I perceive to be the right resources for the right individual. But I learned in the last year that if it wasn't matched properly to that individual, then it wasn't going to work. And we had to try a couple of times with one person, and I couldn't tell, is it a learning issue or where is their gap? Because yes, they violated something, but it didn't feel like this was intentional. And so how do you sort through all those issues? So one of the other things I wanted to throw out was a recommendation that our board recently came up with, and that is we have a pool of money that is set aside every year in our budget for the referrals to a substance use disorder and mental health program. And so if it's a sizable chunk of money, but if we don't have people that we refer into that program, we've got this money sitting there. So the board determined that it could use some of that, didn't have to, but it could use some of that to subsidize some of the cost for what other remediation activities. And we found a couple of great ones, but they're really expensive, and to subsidize them for people to attend. Thank you.
So at the University of Toronto, when we had repeat physicians, because this is the Faculty of Medicine, and we have thousands and thousands of trainees, we did an analysis, and the comorbidity of wellness issues of all types runs between 50 and 60%. There's no sense about whether it's causal or a covariant. The issue is whether someone's unwell and then they make a mistake, or because they're struggling, it surfaces. We were not, but in the remediation work that we do, we encourage people, the individuals, that we're not your helpers in that, but you're going to have stress again. You need to solve that you're not making professional errors or cutting corners every time you get stressed. You need to have a better path. There's a lot of research that says these are learned patterns of behavior that happen in undergraduate or before they get to college and our professional programs. So there is a lifetime of making mistakes from the literature.
Sri Lekha from Virginia. Well-organized presentation. Thank you. Couple of questions. After doing the informal conference for the cases, how often do you send it to, what percentage of cases do you send it to full board meeting? That's my first question. We have about 10,000 physical therapists and 3,000 physical therapist assistants. So that's less than half of what you have in Texas. I'm just curious to know what percentage. Second thing is continuing education. Do you recommend certain courses? Because every time I do that, I'm always struggling to kind of understand. I usually say ethics course, compliance, regulation, but I'm always struggling to kind of write down what kind of course. I was just curious to know. And third one is recommending community service hours is not something that we have. I'll take that message. Thank you for that suggestion.
Okay, let me think if I can remember your first question was about, yeah. Okay, so after the investigations committee meets and the informal settlement conferences happen, and then whatever orders are sent out, and all of that, we take everything to the full board, and then we ratify everything at the board meeting. So that's all done. We take it as a recommendation from the committee, but there can be discussion and changes made at that time too. Would you say that's a accurate comment, Karen? And then in terms of continuing education, we don't necessarily recommend anything. We might in a newsletter or something say, we might recommend not a specific course or anything, but just We do have specific courses they have to take for human trafficking for renewal, and those have to be a specified course that's approved by HHS. And then we also have an ethics portion that's satisfied by taking the Texas JAM through FSBPT, but we haven't necessarily in the past recommended any specific courses either for licensees or for people that are receiving a disciplinary action.